I did this little presentation because of something I believe it was Sam said about a year ago, talking about when he was showing one of his collections of a small country. And there were some references to crosses and crucifixes and so on. Uh, and then I think it was Alan picked up on that and mentioned that there are almost innumerable types of crosses. This is a quick look at some of them. Naturally, the cross is a religious symbol for Christians, but in many cultures, it's kind of a vestigial thing at this point. Uh, for instance, when it appears on a flag, it doesn't necessarily mean that that nation is heavily involved in Christianity at the present time. This will not be about crucifixes. The difference being that a cross is a geometric shape. Crucifix has the body on it. But before getting there, the two other major Abrahamic faiths have their symbols as well. Just to mention them to show my bona fides here. I came across this stained glass. I don't know where it's from, but it's a magnificent window. Absolutely astonishing. So, of course, as most of us know, there are at least two major Jewish symbols. One is the menorah, the candelabrum, if you will, and of course the Star of David. There may be others. I'm not familiar with them, if so, but these are often symbols of Judaism. And in the Muslim world, by far the most widely used symbol is the crescent and star. Whenever I see this symbol, I have to ask myself, because I know very, very little about Islam. It often seems that the star is placed in a geographically impossible place. That is to say, where it would be inside the circumference of the crescent, if the crescent were the full moon. And I don't know if that has any meaning. I was hoping that that Phil would be here today and he could elucidate, perhaps. The
Hmm.
stamp here on the left is from, I guess it's Turkey.
Yes, it's a
And
postage due stamp.
uh-huh. And it's absolutely inscrutable to me. I only have it here because it has the star and crescent. While going through this stuff, I also came across many times this calligraphic representation of the name Muhammad. And I wish Phil were here again because he could tell me which part of all that is. That cannot be all necessary. I know that Arabian calligraphy can be very elaborate, but I don't know what part of that is. Well, to the main topic then, crosses. The one we see most common is known as the Latin cross. You wouldn't believe how far I had to go to find an example of this on a stamp. It seems to be the case that those countries that are inclined to put a cross on a stamp from time to time will go with the crucifix, uh, which is much more detailed. And as I said before, contains the book. So finally, I consider this virtually cheating. I had to go to Vatican City to find one that had a cross on it. But certainly, I don't get any extra credit for that assignment. Moving away from the Latin cross, if you add a second horizontal, you will get what's known as the cross of Lorraine or the patriarchal cross. They do differ, but not by much. And reading on this stuff, descriptions of, say, the cross of Lorraine would very much seem to fit illustrations with the patriarchal cross on it. As an aside, do you remember the comment that Winston Churchill made after the war? He, talking about the cross of Lorraine, and he was referring obliquely to Charles de Gaulle. He said, I have had to bear many crosses in my life, but by far the heaviest was the cross of Lorraine. He really didn't get along with de Gaulle at all. Of course, the Maltese cross first appears on a stamp as a cancellation, which is kind of interesting. Uh,
Mhm.
we all know that it was used briefly as the earliest cancellation on British stamps. It was only used for, I think, less than a year. I'm not sure about that. Very, very quickly, they got away from it because it was, as you can see in this one here, was considered, what's the word, defamatory of Queen Victoria, the way it was blatted on her profile. Eventually, the Maltese cross, it didn't take long, it made it onto stamps too. The one on the right here is similar to something I'm going to show later. You can see that it has the familiar Maltese cross, the four uh, arms, if you will, of the cross, but then spreading out toward the end. But it also has four smaller ones in the corners, and that will reappear in a different type of cross. Very quickly, Switzerland put out stamps and they used a cross, but it doesn't have a particularly religious symbolism whatsoever. The white cross was used early in Switzerland's history when the Confederacy was first put together. And when you see a cross on a Swiss stamp, it will always be white. Generally speaking, the other forms of the cross, the color doesn't matter. Of course, this is the red cross, uh, a symbol that was introduced to the world by Henri Dunant, who witnessed the horrible slaughter at the Battle of Solferino in 1859. When I think about this incident, I'm often reminded of no one, really no one, except a scholar, even knows what the Battle of Solferino was all about. And yet, thousands and thousands of people were killed. The madness of war.
The um, the greatest rarity among Greek stamps is called the solferino. It's an error of color, which is kind of a reddish mauve. It's the color that was intended for the numerals on the back of the stamp, but it was used for the face in this one case, and there are only about a dozen of these stamps in existence. Anyway, the reason it's called that is that the color of the stamp reminded uh, the person who named it, who I'm afraid I can't tell you who that was, but it
Mhm.
reminded him of the color of the earth after the Battle of Solferino, stained with
Oh,
blood.
yeah.
Right, sandy ground stained with blood had a
Mm,
particular shade of red that that was used in the naming of the color of that stamp.
very interesting. What era is that stamp from?
It's from 1871.
Uh,
Yeah, it's one of the large Hermes head issues.
I see. Thank you. The Red Cross appears on innumerable stamps, of course. Here are a couple examples from the United States. Another type of cross is the saltire, which is a word from heraldry. And I get such a kick out of reading definitions of heraldry. That world has its own vocabulary, and it's at times almost impossible to understand what they're talking about when you look at a definition. So I looked up in the American Heritage Dictionary, and I found the same definition elsewhere too. Saltire, an ordinary in the shape of a St. Andrew's cross, formed by the crossing of a bend and a bend sinister.
It's
Now,
gibberish.
anyone who can interpret that gets a free Coca-Cola from me. I just think that is marvelous. And this is in a dictionary that is out for the average American to use. That's how heraldry defines things. It's just charming. In any case, the saltire, it forms part of the Union Jack. That part of it refers to Scotland, of course. And as such, the saltire appears on many stamps from the British Commonwealth. This is the stamp that with the cross insignia on it, that is similar to that earlier Maltese stamp I showed. This is the symbol of the Evangelische Church in Germany. And for some reason, they use this very convoluted form of the cross as their insignia, known as the Jerusalem cross, also known as the Crusaders cross. In Scandinavia, I never thought about this until I did this little research. They have crosses on all their flags, but they're set sideways. I don't know why that is. And hence they appear sideways on some Scandinavian stamps. Many of us know the Celtic cross. The difference here is that it has a ring added to the design. Technically, the ring is called the nimbus, or cloud in Latin. And there are many, many other patterns of cross. I could go on, but I think I've taken up too much of your time, and I don't want you to be cross with me.
I'm wondering about the Crusaders cross. It looks actually as though it could be a sort of a precursor of the Maltese cross. The Maltese cross, is sometimes called the eight-pointed cross. Each bar of the cross divides into two at the end, whereas the Crusaders cross has just a sort of bar at the end. What's called the Maltese cross was originally the symbol of the military religious order of St. John, which was established in Jerusalem during the Crusades. And then the Crusaders moved to Rhodes, and later after that they moved finally to Malta. I'm suspecting that what they call the Crusaders cross developed into what we call now the Maltese cross.
It could be. There are other forms of the cross. The most loathsome, of course, is what the Germans call the Hakenkreuz, the swastika.
Right.
And I simply refuse to include that in the presentation.
Roger, there's another cross that you didn't mention that I think is a common, affiliated, I think, with Orthodox churches. It's like a cross of Lorraine, but the second bottom cross is a slanted cross and not as long.
Yes. If I had had more time to prep this thing, I would have included that, because it is the cross that many millions and millions of people are most familiar with.
Speaking of Maltese crosses, I have some things that I recently got. I got these seals, which are envelope seals from the Order of St. John of Jerusalem, but in the Netherlands, which I thought was unusual. Because, now the Order of St. John of Jerusalem, they're primarily ambulance drivers, hospital workers, wartime ambulance drivers.
By the way, the Order of St. John of Jerusalem is also known as the Knights Hospitaller. There were two of these military religious orders during the Crusades, the Knights Templar and the Knights Hospitaller. And the Knights Templar was destroyed as an order by centuries ago by a French king at the time who was jealous of their power. So he persecuted them and destroyed that group. But the Knights Hospitaller still apparently exists. You were mentioning hospital workers and ambulance drivers in the Netherlands. So this goes all the way back to the Crusades.